Welcome to another episode of Inside the Mustroom, where I sit down with law enforcement experts to discuss the forever war, the war on crime. And tonight we have Sergeant Strom, formerly of the NYPD Intelligence Division, and currently the author of the book, an absolute page-turner by the way, Brooklyn to Baghdad, an NYPD intelligence cop fights terror in Iraq. The man has lived through at least 3 or 4 lifetimes. He was a Marine, cop, and member of the unique Phoenix team. So pleased to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me on, Paul. I appreciate it very much.
Well, I guess to just kick this off, I'd love to ask, what is your origin story? Where did you grow up, and what led you to join the Marine Corps? I think that was your first step in this world of tactical profession, if you will.
Well, I grew up on Long Island. For the most part, I lived with my grandparents. My parents had gotten divorced. So I grew up in a nice little Tony town called Garden City. And my grandparents pretty much raised me until I was about 12, 13 years old. And then there were some other tumultuous moments in my upbringing with my mom and my sisters and things. So I was kind of floundering. I was actually, in school, got good grades, but I hated going to school. I think there was a lot of issues because of what was going on in my personal life that impacted on that. And I saw the Marine Corps as a way out. And thank God I did, because the Marine Corps literally saved my life. It gave me discipline, it gave me motivation, gave me direction, and it made me realize that, you can do anything in life if you're willing to work hard enough for it. And up until then, I wasn't really, I didn't really have a lot of confidence in myself, but the Marine Corps gave me that in spades, and it's really something I've carried through pretty much my whole life. I've always fallen back on that training and that experience.
Did you have family in the Marine Corps, friends in the Marine Corps? What made the Marine Corps stand out to you? What made you walk up to that recruiter?
Well, it's funny. I used to go to a place called Roosevelt Field out in Long Island, and I would literally walk past the recruiting station that they had there at the time. I don't know if it's still there anymore, but this is back in 1978. And I would look at these guys, and they'd be out taking a smoke break or whatever, and said, wow, I was so impressed with their uniform and the way they carried themselves. And I'd also seen a lot of movies, just like most kids, war movies, John Wayne and things like that. And I said, wow, that's something I would really love to do. And I knew what I was getting myself into in terms of the physicality and the mental, but I was like, I really want to test myself, test my limits on it. And that's pretty much what drew me. Now, had the Marine Corps recruiting station not been there, and it was maybe the Air Force or the Navy, maybe I would have focused more on them, because but they were in basically like a satellite recruiting building, basically, that they just kind of like plopped down next to the bus stop. And that's pretty much all I saw every time I went there.
I'm sure it was strategically placed there. I think they knew what they were doing.
I'm sure it was too. I'm sure it was.
But of course, whether it's basic training or boot camp, the stories, veterans always seem to talk about the stories from boot camp. Do you have any stories from boot camp? Did you go to Paris Island, or were you on the West Coast?
No, I went to Paris Island, and it was funny. I'd never been on a plane before. So I'm at Fort Hamilton in Brooklyn, where you do like all the processing before for all the branches, really. And next thing you know, I'm getting on a bus going to Kennedy Airport. And, when you go to boot camp, unlike what people that, don't know or have no military experience, you go with the clothes on your back. You don't even bring a toothbrush. You just basically get on the plane. And so here I am, apprehensive. I'm 17 years old. I'm flying on a plane for the first time. And now I get to Beaufort, South Carolina. And as soon as I get off the plane, there's a drill instructor standing there. And he's like, are you here for Marine? Like screaming. I'm like, oh my God, it's just like the movies. He's screaming already. And they said, so he goes, oh, go stand over there. So I guess I waited for, I don't know how many more people to get off the plane from different parts of the country. And we get on the bus, and we literally drove around for like 3 hours. So it's 3 o'clock in the morning. We're driving, I remember looking out the window and seeing the gates of Paris Island, Marine Corps basic training. But I also remember driving around for another 3 hours. I'm like, wow, this base must be enormous. Like, how big is this base? And then we get off the bus, and the next thing you know, they're like, get on the yellow footprints, and they're screaming again. And, of course, you're delirious because you're pretty much up over 24 hours. I don't think I slept more than 5 minutes. And that's when it all started. The yelling, screaming just became continual there for the next 14 weeks. So,
There's a lot there that I can relate to. I went through Fort Hamilton myself when I went through all of that. And also, too, I think they did the same trick when I was in Fort Benning, Georgia, where they drove us for hours. And I thought, oh, man, they're really driving us out there to the boonies, man. The basic training must be in the middle of the forest or something. And later on, when we graduated, we realized that reception, where we were originally stationed, was right across the street from where we were doing basic training. But it's all part of that mind game.
yeah.
Do you still keep in contact with some of the Marines you went through boot camp with?
As a matter of fact, I do. I have a very good friend, Paul. He used to live in Staten Island. He now lives in New Jersey. And I have another really good friend, Rob Gracie. And it's funny because we were all roommates at one point in time. And we lived off base. We were, all of us were corporals. My friend Paul made a career out of it and got promoted to Sergeant Major. And he was actually in the running for Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps. So funny story, my friend Rob put together through Facebook a reunion. We had the reunion probably about 7 or 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago. And to make a long story short, all these people showed up from where we used to, I was stationed at MCAS New River, which was a helicopter place. And I worked on the Cobras. So we were all in the same shop together. So here we are, all these faces that I hadn't seen since 1982. And now I guess it's like 2013, 2014. And it was amazing. And now since then, we stay in touch on social media, and we call each other and text each other and send funny things now and then about the Marine Corps and whatnot. But yeah, to answer your question, yes, we've kind of reunited and stayed together.
Now, you talked a little bit about how some of that training stuck with you for the rest of your life, and you always lean back on it. Can you talk about some of the lessons that you got out of boot camp?
Yeah, definitely discipline, definitely being able to hold your tongue when you want to be vocal, know when to speak, not when to speak. Learn how to take direction from people above you, and just learn to work with people. And that's one thing the military is great about. If you're shy or you're an introvert, I mean, that's going to have to change. You just can't survive. You're in close quarters. I have 16 months at sea on different carriers with the same people I was just talking about, Rob and Paul and things like that. And you learn how to work as a team. You can't survive if you don't work as a team. There's no slacking. There's no any of that. But there's great camaraderie and great love and affection that you have, and you become like brothers, really. And so the military, for anyone that has any reservations about going into it, I know a lot has changed. I know there are some issues right now that are really like putting a strain on recruiting and retention and whatnot. But in terms of if you don't have a direction, it's a great place to start, and it might be a great life choice for your final career, your one and only career. It's amazing, and the people that you meet are from all over the world and from all different walks of life. So that's an exposure I wouldn't have gotten had I not joined the Marine Corps early on.
Now, you said you were working on Cobras in the
Yes.
Marine Corps. Is that what you were primarily doing? What was your, I guess we called it MOS, but.
Correct. Yeah, I was an aviation ordnanceman. So I worked on the gun systems and the weapons delivery systems. They called us bomb builders and bomb loaders because, that's what we did. The Cobra is actually, believe it or not, it's being taken out of service. I think it was just actually the squadron that I was at, HMA 269, they just collapsed it. And they're not going to be using the Cobras anymore, which I don't know why, because it's really a very lightweight and a great close air support attack helicopter, but for whatever reason. But I got to fly in them. I got to work on them. I went on 2 cruises. I have over 16 months combined time at sea from different deployments. Worked on a carrier, been in the Middle East, been in Europe, been in Scandinavia, been in the Indian Ocean, all over the world, courtesy of the Marine Corps and the Navy too. So.
And at what point are you working on Cobras and traveling the world that you said, you know what, NYPD, time to be a police officer? When did that ever click for you?
Well, I in the Marine Corps, I don't know what it is now. I know when I came on, it was automatically a 4-year commitment. There wasn't anything like a 2 or a 3-year commitment. So after 4 years of traveling and constantly, because that's one thing when you're in a helicopter base, if you're part of a MAG group, you're highly deployable. So you're constantly, if you're not on a ship doing training, you're going to places like Yuma, Arizona, you're going to Puerto Rico, you're constantly on the move. So I think if I added up all my time, and I don't mean to make this a long story, I think I probably had about a year and a half on station at New River. The rest of the time I was deployed. So it was starting to get old on me. And they were throwing money at me and everybody else for that matter, if they wanted, if you wanted to stand, because it was a good MOS. But I was like, no, I'm tired. I want to change. And, when I got out, like many people, I was like, well, what am I going to do? Are my skills transferable into the civilian world? And I thought, well, the NYPD is pretty cool. It's kind of a paramilitary organization. And there's so many subgroups in the NYPD that I thought, well, maybe I could get into emergency service, or maybe I could get into the bomb squad with that kind of a background. But that was kind of like the impetus for the whole transition from the Marine Corps to the NYPD.
Did you take the exam when you came back after your tours, or how did that work?
Yeah, no, I took the exam. I'm trying to remember. It was some high school in Flushing, Queens, on Queens Boulevard that I took it. And I want to say there was, I don't know how many, there had to be thousands of people taking the test. And I was like, oh, wow, and I did the best I could, and I ended up getting called. I was in what they call band 1. So I think my overall score was 96, which I amazed myself. I guess the test, if I was to take it now, might be more like 76 or 86. I don't know, but I did pretty well on that. And so I ended up, coming on the job, and it was, that was in January of 1987. And I stayed till February of 2007, and plus 3 weeks. So I did just over 20 years, got my pension. And again, great experience, amazing people. I think, in one of our conversations we had before the show, I really got to live out my fantasies and do the things that people wish they could do, in terms of police work, things that they see in a movie. I mean, it was really never a dull day. And when I came on, whether you were on patrol or in a specialized unit, there was a lot of violent crime that was related to drugs, crack in particular, cocaine, even marijuana. People were getting killed for selling marijuana where they shouldn't have been selling it in somebody else's spot. And it was a busy time. It was a busy time, but it was like baptism by fire. You had no choice. You had to learn the job. You got out there and you just got after it. And one of the things that I learned early on from the old timers was, if you have a sector, you're responsible for that sector. Everything that happens, if there's a radio run and you're ready to wrap up another job, you better wrap it up and get to that other job. You did not want somebody backfilling your sector. And so you took pride in your work. You took pride in ownership of your territory, whatever that was. And of course, if there was an emergency, you always backed your brother and sister officers up.
I love that you said that, because that is something I keep reiterating now to some of the guys newer than me about being a steady sector. And that was something that was taught to me by the old timers who probably learned from guys like you.
Maybe so.
So that's great. What year did you come on the job specifically?
January of 1987.
And I know I've asked you this before, but I just got to ask it again because I think it's so great. So when you came on, you actually got to use the small sap pocket or billy pocket, right?
That's correct. They actually issued you a rubber billet. It was probably, I don't know how long, maybe 8 inches long or whatever, 9 inches long. It's long enough to have your hand around it, and probably another 5 or 6 inches after that. And yeah, I don't think anybody took it out on patrol because it was just one more thing to lose. I mean, you always took your nightstick, and then you always had a mag light. That mag lights, I don't even know if they use them anymore because they're so heavy. But the mag light was, you never went out on patrol, even in the daytime, without a flashlight or a mag light. But the billet, yeah, we had that. In fact, when I came on, they had the powder blue shirts, and it was funny. So if you were in the NYPD, you had the patch, I believe, I want to say, if I'm not mistaken, on the left side. It could have been the right side, I don't remember. But you only have one patch. Transit and housing had it on the other side. So that's, there's always this distinction of the 3 branches of the NYPD. I know that's changed. I know there's just basically one NYPD patch regardless of where you are. But that's how it was. Then we went to 2 patches. Then we went to the uniform that's still being used today. The dark, I guess I don't know, it's not really black. I guess it's really a deep dark blue, right? And so that, and actually everybody kind of welcomed that change, because that uniform, I thought, number one, I thought it looked better, number one. And number two, it didn't stain as easily. The other, if you had the powder blue shirt on, if you spilled your coffee because you drove over a bumper, you stopped short, unless you had to change your shirt, you were wearing that shirt for the rest of the day. It didn't look too good. So.
Well, one thing I always wanted to bring back were the leather jackets. I always thought those were great, but I don't think those are coming back.
No, I don't think so either, Paul.
Another thing about your equipment is you probably started out with a revolver, right?
Correct. Yeah, I started out with a revolver, and believe it or not, I don't know if my class was the first class, but it was one of the first classes where they actually started using speed loaders. So for people not familiar with firearms and revolver, speed loader is basically something it's like a quick release, and it holds 6 .38 caliber rounds in the same shape and diameter as the cylinder for the revolver. And the idea was that if you got into a shootout, you wouldn't have to look down, and you could load it in there and twist it and basically drop to the ground and get back up and running. Prior to that, cops were carrying what they called dump pouches or ammo pouches. So they literally carried the pouches upside down with bullets in it. And of course, the pouch will always seem to get caught on something. Now your bullets are falling all over the street, now it's like, and the idea, obviously, let's be honest. I mean, for anyone that's even just at a range where nobody's shooting at you and tried to reload a 9mm, much less now a revolver with speed loaders, and you're talking about ideal weather conditions, is very difficult to do, even though there's really no threat, coming toward you. Now, in the real world, if you had to do that, where shots are ringing out, I mean, there's really no way, because your fine motor skills just go away, and to be able to actually reload like that was just too difficult, and cops were getting killed during reloading. It was proven over and over again. So in 1994, I finally got my 9mm Glock 17. 19. And thank God for that, because it's so much better, so much easier and friendlier to use. And I think the marksmanship, there was some issues with it, though. The funny part is we had never had semi-automatic weapons, so we had transitioned into it. And when I first got the 9mm, the Glock, it had a 5.5-pound trigger pull. By the time I left the police department, it had over 13 to 15-pound trigger pull. So they changed it each time there was a questionable shooting, because there was a lot of accidental discharges. The reality is that the gun doesn't accidentally discharge. If your finger's on the trigger and you pull it for some reason, whether it gets caught in your clothing or you go to put it in your holster, any number of ways, it happens. So they changed it and put it to 13. Well, when they did that, and I'm just going to be honest with you, the shooting scores went way down, because now you're at Rodman's Neck and it's February and you're trying to shoot in 20-degree weather, and you can't even feel your finger, much less the pull of the trigger. And the scores went down. So they used to give you, if you scored an expert, you'd get an expert pistol badge. They did away with that. They just basically said pass, fail. So now I don't know if that's changed. That may have changed, and maybe you could tell me that, Paul, but that's how it was when I was on the job, and before I left, it was like that.
Well, when I came on, they still had the 12-pound trigger pull. And actually part of the JST, I don't know if it was the same for you, but for the job standardized test, there was a portion at the end of, running up and down the stairs at the dummy drag. There was a trigger pull test where you would have to hold your firearm. It was like a dummy firearm with 12-pound trigger pull in a circle, and you'd have to hold it steady and pull 16 with your dominant hand, switch to your non-dominant, and fire 15. You weren't aiming, you weren't doing anything. It was just to see if you could pull 12 pounds 16 times. And I mean, how accurate that is going to be in a gunfight, I don't know.
Right.
But there were a lot of people who actually ended up failing because of that. Just, it was such a heavy trigger pull. And
Right.
now I think it's gone back to 5.
Well, and again, I'm not an armorer. I mean, I have some familiarity with weapons, and I've had extensive training with weapons, different weapons, long guns, pistols and things. But one thing I can tell you right now, if the manufacturer manufactures any weapon, doesn't matter if it's a long gun, shotgun, pistol, and their recommended spec is X for that particular weapon, it's probably a good idea not to change that, because that's why they made the gun that way, and they keep monkeying around with stuff like that. And I think it does a disservice. And I think, in the heat of the battle, like it can make all the difference. It really, really can, between hitting your target, missing the target, and potentially pushing the trigger or pushing the gun in a direction so that it unintentionally hits an innocent bystander. So there's a lot to be said about modifying something that didn't come from the manufacturer that way.
Absolutely right. Now, talking about, being in the heat of it, you were assigned originally in Queens out of the academy, right?
That's correct. Yep.
How was that first patrol experience? I mean, was that really eye-opening for you?
Well, you have to understand, when I came on, you actually walked the footpost. You didn't get in a radio car. So a lot of times what would happen is, you're new. And actually there was a big seniority gap when I came on, because there was a hiring freeze. The city was having financial difficulty. So when I came on, I think a lot of the people that were already in the precinct had 5 years or more. Some had 7 or 8 years. So there was a big disparity between the people that were already there plus you. So if you thought that you were going to get in a radio car right away, that wasn't really going to happen. And you go there with a bunch of other guys, and you kind of like all in the same boat, and you hope that you can make some friends. But you initially walk a footpost for a while, and I mean walk a footpost like 3 or 4 scratches a night in all kinds of weather, not in the nicest places and things like that. And eventually, what ends up happening is the steady radio car team, somebody doesn't come in for whatever reason. They had a medical issue or a childcare issue or whatever it was, or they're just on vacation. And if you proved yourself on the footpost, maybe the guy that was riding a steady sector and who does not have a partner that day let you get in the car. But the first thing he does is say, you're the recorder, don't touch the radio. And a lot of other colorful things are said in that conversation. And then, after probably about 6 months to a year, it's different for everybody. Hopefully you get into a steady car. Hopefully you find somebody that you can, partner up with, so to speak, and you start riding more steady. But, some of these people that are like on a 4 to 12 shift, like they're not giving up their sector car for anybody. That's their car. So they either have to get promoted or they have to be, laterally transferred or whatever it might be for you to get that spot. So it's an attritional type of thing. It doesn't happen automatically.
Now, you did do some really interesting stuff getting into some specialized units. But before we get into that, like I said, I do have a soft spot for the steady sectors. Can you talk about that? How, when you start out, usually that's where most people look, that's what they want to do. They want to become a steady sector, and sort of the importance of the backbone, if you will, of police work. That's kind of where you cut your teeth, right? That's where you start to learn really what it's all about.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, when you ride a steady sector and you know the boundaries of your sector, and you know the population and the businesses and the business owners and things like that, that's where you really start to become a cop. The academy, they say, forget everything you learned in the academy. Well, I mean, there's some truth to that in terms of actually doing the job. There's taking a test on a piece of paper and then actually applying practically what you've learned. And a lot of it is communication skills. I was recently out of the Marine Corps, so my communication skills were, I'm telling you what to do as a cop. And sometimes people would be like, well, I'm not doing that, so that causes some problems. And I learned how to be a better communicator. But, when you get out there, you see the 80 cases, you see the shooting victims, you see the robbery, businesses being robbed, and pickpockets, not so much pickpockets, but pocketbook snatches on the street, ladies being really whacked over the head and knocked unconscious. You really, really learn a job. Car accidents where there's, people are hurt, children are hurt. A lot of fires too. You end up being the first on the scene. The fire department, they get the call, but generally speaking, you can get there just because of the logistics that are involved in moving a big vehicle like that and getting to where you are. So a lot of times you're actually the first responder trying to evacuate people out of a building. But you become a counselor, you become, get involved and immersed with the domestic violence things that never seem to end and never seem to change. And it's just the faces and the locations. But yeah, to your point, when you're on patrol, I always say this to people, and people think that I'm exaggerating, depending on the house that you work at, but pretty much any precinct. If you have a year on patrol in the NYPD, and I'm talking about on the 4 to 12, I'm not talking about on the day shift, you pretty much could go to any police department in the country and ride a sector car. You may have to learn some of their terminology and some of their local laws and things like that. But if you're a street cop, if you're quote unquote domed a street cop by your peers, that's the greatest moniker and medal that you'll ever wear on your chest. It's really, really a testament to who you are as a person, as a cop. It really is.
And just for people who might not know, just to explain to them, a sector car would be a certain precinct is divided into separate sectors that are policed by those steady sectors or who are in a car in that area, right? Um, Going from there, so you went from patrol and you got into SNU, was it?
I
Or
got into anti-crime,
anti-crime first? Okay.
and I did that for about a year and a half. And then just for your audience's benefit, I know you know this, they have what they call track. So I was making my bones. I was making collars, gun arrests, robbery arrests in anti-crime. And then what ends up happening, the detective squad, or the PDU, precinct detective unit, had at the time what they call a robbery track. So they would bring you up basically on a 30-day trial period, and then they would just keep re-upping you 30 days at a time if they liked you, if you performed. So I was in that for about a week with another guy. Now I'm not with my anti-crime team anymore. I'm with another guy who's also an anti-crime team member, but he's on a different team. So we flip-flop. So there's one, you do like 1 week of days on anti-crime, and the other team would do like the 4 to 12 or whatever shift they needed to address a certain condition, and then you'd flip. So this fellow Rob, he was from another team. So both he and I get up in there, and now we're like, and we know each other, but we've never worked with each other. And the first night out of the gate, we end up having a gun call. We pulled over a guy in a van, and the guy leans into the truck, which was like a tell. And next thing you know, we're pulling out a loaded 9mm from him. So that was like within 4 or 5 days, or the first night I was working with Rob. Fast forward, same scenario. And again, for your audience's benefit, I know you know this, Paul. If you make a collar, if I make the collar, you and I are notionally are in a team. If I take a collar one night, you're up the next time that we go out. So in other words, you don't want it to always be that Chris or Paul is taking all the arrests and vice versa. No one's getting any. You try to be equitable about it, because again, you're trying to make your bones, and you're trying to extend your career path. So now we're out a couple nights later, pull over a stolen car. Next thing you know, we get the car stopped. The guy is high as a kite. Marijuana is literally like falling out like a Cheech and Chong movie. He's got Heineken bottles all over the thing. And the radio was up so loud that I can't even hear my own voice as I'm telling them, to get out of the car. So a fight ensues. I end up shooting him. He doesn't die. And they end up transferring me out of the 101 precinct, because this was back in 1996, right around this time, actually. And they put me into a robbery squad. So now I have the whole borough of Queens. I'm in a plainclothes unit. We rotate cars out every month, so we have a different car every month. And I'm having the time of my life. I mean, we made more arrests, more search warrants than anything. And again, you're out on the street, you're building your observation skills, your communication skills, and you're working in a team environment, and it was incredibly exciting.
At what point did you take the promotional exam?
When I was in the robbery squad, I ended up taking the test, and I had actually, they had this thing where you could go like once or twice a week to like study for promotional exams. And by the time I went to take the test, this information was just falling out of my head. And I think 5 minutes after I took the test, I probably couldn't even tell you how I responded to one question or another on the sergeant's test. So I ended up scoring in the top, because of my seniority and medals and things like that, in the top 75% of the sergeant's test. So I took it, I want to say I took it in like 97 or 98, I think is when I took it. And I found out like probably 6 months later that I had passed it and where I placed on it.
And what was your track to getting promoted and then eventually going to Intel? I know we're covering a lot here in one sitting, but basically, how did you make it into Intel?
Well, I had gotten promoted to sergeant, and then it's a lot like when you're a cop. You don't really know where you're going to go. You have an idea where you'd like to go, and I ended up going to Brooklyn in the 76th precinct, which covers like Red Hill, Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens, and Gowanus. And I was like, Brooklyn. I was a Queens guy for 12 years, 13 years. So I get there, and I'm back on patrol. I'm in uniform, and it was an amazing precinct, great cops, a very small precinct. I think the total number of people there was less than 100, and that was everybody. Like cops, sergeants, lieutenants, and the captain. So it was a very small precinct. But the guys and girls that were there were great. The precinct itself had such an amazing array of food. There was like a heavy enclave of Italian people there. We had some housing developments that were there. I mean, there was just a mixed bag of people. And this was, when I got there, was in 2000. There was a whole regentrification and a rebuilding of Carroll Gardens. So all these old brownstones that had sat empty were now being bought up because everything had up at Sunset Park, Brooklyn Heights had pretty much been maxed out, which is on the promenade. And so just to give your audience some perspective, if you were to take Atlantic Avenue as far west as you could go, you run right into the East River. And when you were at the East River, you're looking at the Staten Island Ferry Terminal. And just to your right, about half a mile, not even, is the Brooklyn Bridge. So that's the northernmost border. The southernmost border goes down to the 7-2 precinct and pretty much where the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel is, with the exception of somewhat like the Red Hook housing development stuff. But that's pretty much the southern border. And then you have the water on the west, and then you have, I want to say, Court Street on the east was like the easternmost boundary. So it was a really mixed bag of businesses and residential areas and restaurants, but it was amazing. I loved it there. And I was there for about probably about 6 months, and this new spot came open, and the captain approached me and said, "Would you be interested in taking it?" And I was like, "Sure." So now I'm on patrol, and I'm meeting. I know all the people in the precinct pretty much by face, if not by name. And now I'm like relearning this position as a supervisor. Now I had plenty of street time experience, but I'm in there now with people that don't know me. So now there's a whole a familiarity process, and I wouldn't say an initiation, but they're definitely sizing me up. And I had like the most amazing people in my SNU team. I had guys, I had girls, I had Puerto Rican, I had Dominican, I had Jewish, I had Polish. I had like the whole United Nations team, and we are still to this day very close. We talk to each other, we visit each other when I come up to New York, we go out to dinner and stuff like that. So I finally get into the team, and these are all at the time, these guys had like 7 or 8 years on the job. So they're not, they're not new to this job, but they had been in the SNU for already a year or two. And they're like, "Oh, great, we're getting a new sergeant. How's this guy going to be? He's from Long Island. What could he possibly know?" You know what I mean? And he's from Queens. What kind of work gets done at Queens? Like there's this whole pecking order of things in the NYPD that's kind of nuanced and things. So they welcomed me with open arms. I mean, I love these people: Ginger, Esty, Al, Angela, all these people, and we just got along great. And we literally took the numbers from year to date, and we quadrupled the numbers in both felony arrests and search warrants. It was like, some people might not believe this. I'm sure you'd think differently, Paul, but I used to enjoy going to work. I used to love going to work, getting with my team, get the first half hour of administrative crap over and tack up and go out.
What exactly is a SNU team for those people who might not know?
Yeah, great. It stands for Street Narcotics Enforcement Unit. So basically, you're doing all the things that the actual narcotics from the Detective Bureau is doing, but you're doing it at a precinct level. So you're basically trying to develop confidential informants. You're trying to develop information where drugs are being sold. You're trying to arrest people and turn them and flip them over, do proffers with the district attorney's office. So it's kind of the same thing as the actual narcotics unit from the Detective Bureau, but it's on a much smaller scale.
And how did this line you up for intel eventually?
Well, that's a great question. 9/11 had happened, and they were trying to expand the intelligence division because they realized there were some serious gaps there, some things that were missed. And there's a lot I could say, but I'm just going to say that some of the people that were minding the shop who thought they were doing a great job actually sucked at their job. So they wanted to get some people in there that had some street smarts, that could have some better communication skills. And again, I want to be perfectly honest. When I first became a cop, even at the precinct level in the 101, going way back to 1987, 1988, my communication skills were horrible. I was very impatient. I was rough with people in terms of language, and I didn't have, I just didn't have it. Fast forward, I start, working more and more in plain clothes, learning that, hey, if you're nicer to people, they'll give you information. And that's the better way to go. The softer approach actually works way better than the big tough guy approach. So getting back to intel, I was in the street narcotics unit, and the guy, there was what they call an FIO, field intelligence officer, at a precinct level in the 7-6. Well, he had gotten promoted to lieutenant, and before he got promoted, he had approached me and said, "Chris, can you take the spot?" And I'm like, "Gee, I don't know." His name was Freddie Dare. I don't know if he's still on the job, and I was like, "Gee, I'm working with the best bunch of guys and girls. I mean, I love these people. And I was comfortable, and I had steady days off. I was off Sunday, Mondays, and the captain loved me. He's like, "Chris, you make whatever hours you think are appropriate." And what's good about that, when you're not in the queue or in the rundown, you're freelance the whole day. You're not being pulled away off a spot where people are buying and selling drugs. You're basically left alone. But of course, obviously, if there was emergency barring that, you're not in the rundown. You're basically, so to leave that and to go into intel, I really didn't want to go. So fast forward again, the captain at the time was a captain by the name of David Barrere. He's now a 3-star chief in the Housing Bureau. Brilliant guy, great guy. I just have nothing but positive positive things to say, and almost utmost respect for this guy, David Barrere. Well, he gets promoted to deputy inspector, and he moves back over into Queens. And what ends up happening is the new captain comes in. Freddie Dare eventually gets promoted to lieutenant, and now they're without a field intelligence officer in the 7-6 precinct. So the captain that approached me at the time, it was Captain Tommy Harris, and he's since retired as well. And I kind of like put him off. I didn't want to do it, but it was one of those things. The next thing you know, my cell phone is ringing, and it's at the time Deputy Inspector Barrere. And he says, "Chris, I need a favor from you." And I said, "What's that, boss?" He goes, "Can you take the field intelligence spot for me for Captain Harris?" And I said, "For you, boss, anything." And the backstory to that is my son had gotten very, very sick and almost died. So at the time, Captain Harris, when he was the precinct commander, he got me off with full pay for 8 weeks. He got me assigned to employee relations. So when he asked me to do it, it wasn't the same thing as if Captain Harris had asked me. It was a totally different scenario. So I said yes. So that's how I got into intel, and thank God I did, because my career really took off from there. But like most people, when you have and you find a good spot and a niche in the NYPD, it's hard to say goodbye to that, because now you're going back to another unknown. And I had a known entity here, and I had very solid people that, like I say, really I loved and had so much fun working with, that I didn't want to let that go. But I couldn't say no to Captain Barrere at the time. There's just no way I couldn't do that to him. So
now I think a lot of people don't realize how many different units are in law enforcement, specifically the NYPD. Can you also maybe enlighten people about what intel is for? What is the intel bureau for exactly? What do they do?
Well, the Intel Bureau, it does a bunch of different things, but the main focus obviously is counterterrorism. So I always use this as an example when I talk to people. If you can imagine, you're on patrol, you and I, and we're in a sector car, and a job comes over, and a lady has a suspicious person complaint, and you go and talk to her, and she's somebody that lives in Brooklyn. She's lived there her whole life in the same apartment for over 50 years, and she's got a bunch of cats, and she's a widow, so she's got a lot of time on her hands. And she says, there's something odd going on with my next door neighbor. Every Friday night, he has all these Middle Eastern men come, and they park, and their cars are out in front, and they seem to be from out of state. They all have Jersey plates. And, I just think it's wrong. So from a patrol standpoint, you would look at that and say, yeah, that's not a crime. We're not really involved in that. And the fact that this guy annoys you or bothers you, maybe you should talk to the landlord and explain your feelings toward him. In intel, we go and we talk to this lady, because it's not what you know, it's what you don't know that can get you killed. So we are very proactive. So in the intel, I ran the counterterrorism leads desk. So if you can imagine, you're in a PDU, and you're the sergeant, or you're the team lead in the PDU, and cases are coming in. Every case that we responded to, no matter how innocuous it sounded, required not only background checks, but a personal interview of that person. And I'm not talking about on a telephone. We went there and did a visual, we did a door knock, and we spoke to people, and lo and behold, guess what? Some of these people are from New Jersey. You run a few plates and you find out a couple of them are on the watch list. Now, had you not gone that far, and I'm using that as a broad brush example, but that's probably 90% of the leads that come into the intelligence division. Since then, and I openly will have this debate with anybody that wants to have it, the NYPD Intelligence Division, bar none, is the premier of human intelligence and counterterrorism intel, period. Period. There is nothing in the world, or no one in the world, no law enforcement agent in the world that doesn't reach out to the NYPD for a resource or some type of information on a person, place, or thing, period. So when people think that we could never be attacked again, I say, no, we definitely could be attacked again, but it won't be because people answered a complaint from behind their desk on a computer screen and typed out a report. It won't be that way. It'll be because due diligence was done on each investigation, and maybe we missed something. We're not perfect, but we do the best job we can. That's part of the intel. The other part is deep undercover operations, which I'm not going to get too involved with, but you could just imagine that people that are working for the NYPD and you never see them. They have a handler. They would have, maybe you're a detective or I'm a detective. They don't even meet with the supervisor. They're that clandestine. There's only one point of contact that this person has. And they're not even living in New York City. They're doing investigations. So that's how granular it can get. And then you have the other parts. It's really kind of like three parts. There's the live responses. So, for example, there's a train derailment or an explosion, which seems to be happening more often, unfortunately. Well, again, you can't know what's going on until you actually get on the scene. So obviously, everybody's familiar with the New York City subway system and how vast it can be and what's been going on there in terms of just crime, let alone being ripe for terrorist events. So you would have to go on scene there, and you would actually, I know this sounds like a novel idea, not to you, Paul, but actually interview people, talk to real people, try and gather some intel from people that were there, 5 minutes before the event, during the event, and after the event, and what did they see? And you're not going to get that information unless you get on scene. And just for you and your audience's benefit, I worked for a guy named David Cohen, who was this 36-year CIA guy. He's not with the NYPD anymore. And he was brought in there specifically by Ray Kelly, the former police commissioner, as a way of saying, how do we look at this picture differently? Because we got punched in the face twice. We got punched in the face in '93 and then again in 2001. So there's no more of this. We're not tolerating this anymore. So that was who I answered directly to. Now, when I say I answered directly to, did Commissioner Cohen call me on my Nextel direct phone that was issued by the job that I was required to answer? No, but he had his staff call me, and he'd want to know, where are you and what's going on? What's the metrics at the scene? I want to know. And he wanted to know in real time. So if the news crew got there before you, meaning me or you, if we're in this position, and I was in this position for 5 years, and they started reporting on something that you should have been reporting on, you'd be replaced. So there was 4 sergeants in the intelligence division that did this job. There's over 1,000 people in the NYPD. And there was, at the time, there was over 100 sergeants in the intelligence division. So I'd like to think I was pretty confident in my job. I'll let others judge me on that.
No, absolutely. And since you brought it up, I'm going to put you in the chair here and sort of imagine you're talking to maybe someone who's a young officer trying to get into intel, or maybe just someone who wants to get into the intelligence world. From your experience, like you said, this is the premier intelligence division, if you will, in the intel world. What are some of those top tenets or principles that you have personally about gathering intelligence or developing leads?
Well, I like I say, my communication skills, what they were at 23, 24 years of age, or what they eventually became at like 44, 45 years of age are worlds apart. I will say, if you're in a squad and you have some seasoned investigators in there, if you have the ability to watch somebody do an interview or an interrogation, however you want to frame it, watch it and learn from that. And again, you only get good at things by doing them over and over again. So as an example, one of my best friends and one of the best detectives I've ever met in my life is this fellow by the name of Tommy Dades. He wrote an amazing book called Friends of the Family. And I sat around him and watched him do an interrogation, and he could get, information from people better than anyone I've ever seen, and never raise his voice, never become physical, like in terms of pounding his fist on the desk or becoming animated. Just a smooth guy, had a way about him that he would tell people. And what ends up happening is, in the beginning, you'll probably suck at it. You won't be any good, and there'll be a lot of failure. And people get discouraged, and then they become apprehensive and afraid. But my suggestion would be, keep trying and keep learning and keep watching. Not that you have to do what the guy in the room is doing, but watch what he does. Watch interview and interrogation videos on YouTube and say, wow, that guy was really rude to the perp, or he insulted his intelligence, or he called him a name, or whatever, any manner of different things, to say, okay, so those are some things I don't want to do, because clearly those don't work. What are some things that I can do? And one of the things I tell people, and I learned this from other people and watching other people, is you have to be yourself. You have to be comfortable in your own skin. You can't pretend that you're, the smartest guy in the world, because sometimes you get in a room, and I have in Baghdad, where you're in there with a guy that's actually a certified physical engineer, and they're really, really smart people. So if you think you're going to talk over them, or, convince them that you're smarter than them, and you insult them, you lose them. So there's a whole maturation and learning process and learning curve. So I've said a lot in terms of getting into intel. Get into a detective unit as fast as you can, and be the guy that wants to learn, not the guy that wants to show off. The guy that wants to learn, wants to be in there, keep pushing yourself to get better, accept failure, brush yourself off, and do it again until you get better. You're never going to be perfect. And each person you interact with has a different mindset. And so you have to learn all these things, but you can get better at it if you practice it. It's like a sport. But it is perishable. Like if I had to go in a box right now and do an interrogation, I probably wouldn't be that good. I'd probably be hovering around 50, 60% of what I would normally be optimally if I've been doing on a daily basis. But it comes back, people and communication skills come back. And again, my age, I'm 61 years old. Again, when I was in Iraq and when I was in the police department, certainly I was 40 some odd years old. So your level of maturity and your way to approach people is totally different. And if you humble yourself with this person, regardless of the circumstances, they look at you and they realize you're an older person. You're not trying to talk down to this person. If you're similar in age and you're trying to like bark at this person like a chihuahua, well, everybody's got feelings. Everybody has emotions, and that's probably not going to work. It's not going to serve you well.
Fantastic. And I know we definitely got to get into the Phoenix team. But before we leave the NYPD here, the department, can you talk about some of the biggest misconceptions of law enforcement that people have that you would like to just, if you can, just get rid of them right now?
Well, first and foremost, if you're going in there because you think it's going to be cool to have a gun and a badge, and you're going to get to boss people around and be like, Sheriff Dillon in the Wild Wild West, you don't go into police work. And there are people that do that, unfortunately, and they're sourced out very quickly. You have to go in there basically that you're going to serve the people. And I know people would say, "Oh, that sounds like a load of crap, Chris." That's what everybody says, but it's true. You're there to serve people. You're there to serve the community. And there's people there with problems, and they may only have one or two interactions in their life. And it's generally, unfortunately, in a crisis situation. And you're the only person that they can reach out to that can actually hold their hand or give them a hug or a glass of water or whatever when they really, really need it. And it's really incumbent upon you as a human being first, and as a police officer second, to make sure you do that, to make sure you make that connection with people, because that's what's going to change the opinion of people. I loved police work. Like I said, I look forward to going to work. I worked with amazing people, so that was a big thing for me. You're working for the legacy behind the NYPD. Unfortunately, a lot of things are changing, and it's not the cops' fault. It's the leadership's fault, which is a whole other issue, obviously. But to be able to say that you were an NYPD police officer post-career from the NYPD is a calling card. It's something you should be proud of. I'm certainly proud of it. I'm certainly proud of the people that I got to work with and the people that I got to learn from. So my advice to people, if on the misconception that we're out there, that we're indifferent, that we don't care. Yeah, there's those people. Those are the 10% that are in every walk of life. They're like the people at DMV. There's people that are there, like you're going to get there. Some people are super friendly and very helpful. And then there's other people, they don't even look up from the computer screen as you're talking to them. Don't be that guy. Be the guy that's friendly and tries to help somebody when they really need it. Because otherwise, you might as well find another career choice. It's not going to be for you.
That's very well said. And I think in most cases, this is probably where we would end the interview. But in this case, I think we're just getting to the good part here, which is amazing because you've already covered so much in your life up until this point. But sort of let's paint the picture in Iraq, in Baghdad right now. What was the situation on the ground? What was the condition that was needing to be addressed by the Phoenix team?
Well, just so people have an idea what the Phoenix team is, there's a government organization called JIATO, which stands for the Joint Improvised Explosive Device Defeat Organization. So what was happening pre-surge and then since the surge kicked off, the shooting war in Iraq was pretty much over. In other words, soldiers weren't being shot. They were weren't being killed by small arms fire. They were primarily being killed by roadside bombs. And the problem was so pervasive that every time the military bought a different piece of equipment to try and counter the effects of these roadside bombs, it was obsolete before it even got fielded. So fast forward, now the Phoenix team becomes like the brainchild of the JIATO people in Washington, D.C. And they take a group of retired special forces people, and each people in the special forces, similar to the NYPD, has a specialty. And some are marksmen, some are, close quarter battle people, some are medics, some are intel officers, formally trained, some are language specialists and things. And they took that team and put it all together. And I was part of that team as part of the law enforcement perspective. So the idea was, instead of going after the bombs, doing what they call post-blast assessment, we wanted to say what they say in military terms, left of boom. So basically, we wanted to find the device and find the network before the bomb exploded. And hence, by doing that, exploit the network, round these people up so that soldiers wouldn't be killed. So the team is all together. And just, if you could just imagine, all these skill sets are from a retired perspective. These are people that have 20 plus years. I have 20 in the special forces community. When I'm talking about Green Berets and Navy SEALs and JTACs from the Air Force. So there's all these different skill sets and people. There's also a K9 element, there's EOD element, and then there's my element. So if you can imagine, we get a target and we fix the location of the target, meaning the bad guy. We would roll out there at generally 3 o'clock in the morning. We did nighttime ops primarily. And my job was to get what they call positive ID on the bad person. So I would get a targeting package, and in the targeting package is a silhouette. There's no picture of this person. There's a nickname because they're talking in code. And I get there, and through process of elimination, trying to figure out who this fellow is, who this person is. So once that's done, I went back to what I was doing in the NYPD, and it's almost like a movie. Like, you seem like a nice guy. You kind of got wrapped up in this mess, and we find ourselves here. Tell me about your friends. Tell me about who else is involved in this cell. Now, again, just for your audience's benefit, these people are stone cold killers. They are making bombs. They are implanting the bombs. They are financing the bombs. They're creating safe houses for these people. It's like a criminal organization. It's just that it's in a war zone. All the same kind of things that you would see in traditional law enforcement, even with like a Mexican drug cartel, is very similar to what's going on in the insurgency with Al Qaeda fighters and franchise Al Qaeda. So based on what these people would tell me, that I have gone to as many as 4 different targets in one night. So I would start, we would tack up probably about 9, 10 o'clock. We'd launch at either 11, 12 o'clock, get on target at maybe 1, 2 o'clock, and go until the sun came up again to 3 different locations. So unlike the police department, which is, married with all kinds of laws and search warrants and waking judges up in the middle of the night to sign off on something, in the military, in a war zone, you don't have that restriction. You basically have the information, you fix the location of the next target, and you move and you map track to this place. So the team itself rounded up 91 high value targets, tier 1 and tier 2. So when people say, well, what is a tier one? What is a tier two? A tier one is something that would be dedicated to a special forces targeting officer. They would go out, they would do a very quick snatch and grab, and it was either a capture or a kill. Again, not knocking the special forces community, but they're very good at capturing people, and they're certainly good at killing people, but their human exploitation and gathering human intelligence and talking to people is probably on the same level I was when I first started my police career. So that's where the Phoenix team excelled, because now you have all these older people with 20 plus years of experience going out there, and we crushed these people. I mean, we went 60 days without a single IED event in our area of operation, which was unheard of. We were having 1 and 2 a day, every day, before the Phoenix team took hold.
Well, you had some really amazing successes, amazing success rate. And we talked a little bit about this before, as you mentioned, NYPD Intel really giving you that backbone to do what you were doing. But you got to actually witness, and I know we'll make some people mad here, but you actually got to witness some of the shortcomings, to put it politely, of some of these other agencies that would call themselves the experts, right? And how exactly did you witness that?
Well, you go out and you hit these targets. So one of the things I taught the being in the NYPD, doing search warrants and things, no stone is left unturned. You become a subject matter expert in evidence recovery. So I was teaching not only my own team how to recover evidence and how to leave it alone, to photograph it in place and bag and tag it, as they say. I was teaching the organic army that we were with that was out on this mission. So the people that were out on the mission with us was primarily this one unit from the 4th ID called 122 TST, which stands for Tactical Strike Team. And the guy that ran the team was this guy named Sergeant Dave Peluso, who I'm still very close to this day. In fact, I was just texting him the other day. So we're going out there, we're searching. So my primary focus, everybody's got a lane. Okay, my lane, talk to these people, get information, and can we get this guy to give us information, tell us about where the explosives or the weapons cache is being hid, if not in his house, somewhere else can we go to go get them? As they're searching the houses, what are they finding? They're finding tens of thousands of dollar bills, $100 bills, brand new with the rubber bands around in serial number order. Now, in the insurgency, these people are very clever. They didn't steal the money, and they certainly didn't print the money. So the question becomes, how did they get this money? Now, I don't know for a fact where this money comes from. But I do know for a fact that when you're in the FBI or you're in the CIA or you're in the DIA and you're in a war zone, there is an accountant that gives you X amount of dollars, and you and I notionally are both commanding officers in different areas of operation. So you're getting serial numbers 1 through 10. I'm getting 11 through 20. So clearly they know where the money's coming from. But the problem that is now I have to write this in my report. So I don't write the report because I'm trying to hurt anybody. I'm writing the report because there's a problem. And some of these people that we were rounding up were direct members of what they call Mensa, which stands for the Ministry of National Security and Affairs. And they are an intelligence organization in the Iraqi government that didn't even exist until we got there, that was stood up by the CIA. And we rounded up, I can't even tell you how many people from this group. And we were getting ready to do a big, huge takedown, and they pulled the plug on it. Now, why they pulled the plug on it, I don't know. But it seemed like every time we found a lot of money, instead of being happy about that and trying to close the loop on it, people got nervous. And again, in Washington, D.C., you have what they call a COIC, which is basically the main brainchild. And then you have JSOC down in Tampa and all these other places. So they're all getting the same report, the report that the Phoenix team is writing, including my interview and interrogation report. And that is getting read at the president's daily briefing by all the head intel people in what they call the daily INSUM, the intelligence summary. And people want to know, how is it that this team is not only successful, number one, but how is it that they're finding this money? And no one seems to know where this money came from. Like, there's more questions. So the questions start exploding and making people uncomfortable. So from a military perspective, and I know you serve in the Army, if you're a colonel and this is occurring in your area of operation, and your whole purpose is to get your first star, and so you would think soldier mortality would be at the top of your list, but it's really not. It's more about feedback from the general population of the host nation that you're serving in. So if you start arresting these people and you start finding money, and I'm talking thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, it makes people uncomfortable, and it makes it look like that the judgment, maybe, again, notionally, of the commanding officer is somewhat flawed, that he is not doing his job effectively, because that money might actually be traced back to him, because they had another thing, which I know you're aware, called SERP money. So SERP money is basically where the lieutenant colonels and the brigade commanders within the brigade go around and they just throw money out into the population, say, hey, we're trying to generate jobs. We'd like you to pick up trash. Maybe you could paint this wall. And they call it public works project, or SERP money. So it's basically the colonel's emergency response plan. It's basically a nice way of buying friends and influence, buying votes. So that money is going out there. So you have a multitude of people that could be passing out this money. And again, somebody knows, I don't know. Was it the Army itself? Was it the FBI itself? Was it the CIA? Was it the DIA? Was it the Special Forces community? Like, I don't know. But there's an accountant that can tell you exactly whose money that was. There's a way to trace that money, where it came from.
It's very interesting when you bring this stuff up. And like you said, the amount of money that was probably funneled into that area of operations for all sorts of different units who were all claiming they needed it for one reason or another, whether it was civil affairs, special operations, who knows? I mean, I can only imagine the amount of money that we're talking about here. It's probably a great sum.
It really was, Paul. And it got to the point where I was nervous, because you'd find this money, right? Now, in the NYPD, you count it 5 times. Your partner counts it 5 times. You break everything out into 10s, 20s, into the pennies. You want to make sure that you're 100% on this money, because it's going to be bank dropped unless it's going to be marked as evidence. And the last thing I want to do is turn in, because now, again, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, and I've been up like 24 hours straight, and I'm going to be counting this money, and now it's off, and now it's like the allegation becomes, oh, these guys from the Phoenix team, they stole $100. Like, what am I going to spend the money on? I'm in a war zone. Like, what am I, I can't go to the movies. I can't go to the bar and order a whiskey or anything. Like, what am I going to spend the money on? You know what I mean? So it got to the point where the money was so pervasive that I would just give it to Sergeant Dave, and it's like, Dave, give this to the lieutenant or the ground assault commander. I don't know how much is in there, but it's a boat. I would take a picture of it, and there's a boatload of money. But in the beginning, I was counting it, and then you have not only American money, you have Iraqi money mixed in, you have Iranian money mixed in. Like, so how do you do the accounting on that? You know what I mean? I think I sent you a picture of a table full of money. That was like not even the most money that we ever recovered, but literally a table full. And it was right before Christmas time in 2008. It was incredible.
Well, I know we talked about some of the guys that may have been holding us back from success during these missions, but let's talk about and highlight some of the members of your team that you would like to mention just briefly about how they helped you guys to succeed.
Well, the genius of the team, and in fact, my book is in memory of Staff Sergeant Matt Pacino, and I would invite people to actually Google Matt on social media. He was killed in Afghanistan. He was with our team, and when he came to the team, his ability to, as a targeting officer, he was what they call an 18 Fox in the Green Berets. His ability to be a big picture thinker changed the whole dynamic and flow of the team. It was like a complete change. So we went from doing like maybe, I don't know, 15, 20 missions before Matt got there to we had split teams, almost like in a precinct where you had a day tour and a night tour, because we just couldn't keep up with the work. That's how proficient he was. His communication skills were off the chart. He spoke Arabic I wouldn't say very proficiently, but definitely conversationally. And one of the things that Matt did that a lot of people don't realize, he actually came out on the target. So if you can imagine, you're building the picture of a bad guy, and every aspect of this package, and you have to sell that package to the S2, and then it has to go to the JAG officer. There's all these different layers in the military. It's amazing anything gets done, to be quite honest with you. But Matt, his personality and his commitment and his reputation, which was very professional, kind of like bridged that gap, and he went through it very quickly. He would come out on the target, and I would be doing my interview in the bathroom with a flashlight, and I would hear a knock on the door, and it would be Matt. Now, they knew not to knock on the door because they knew I was involved in an interview, and that just kind of like breaks the flow. Like, it's not like on TV. Like, it's hard to regenerate this momentary, like, and pick up where you left off. And so I'd be asking the guy, just as a note, notionally, what's your name? So he'd say Steve. I'm like, are you sure your name isn't Bill? No, it's Steve. It's Steve. So I would get that knock on the door, and it would be Matt, and he'd be handing me his passport and says, oh, turns out that looks very much like you. Are you sure? You sure your name is Bill and not Steve? And then it would be like, no, I'm not a bomb maker. And then he would bring me in like all the hardware for the plug and play. And I'm like, so from there, I would just collapse the guy psychologically, because Matt, and he was teaching the young soldiers the same thing. Like, don't knock on the door unless you have something that's relevant to show Chris that he can manipulate this guy psychologically. And the team took off. It just because now it's really working like a team as opposed to individuals, because there's a lot of standing around too. You have to understand, once the house is completely searched and the evidence is bagged and tagged, they're waiting for me to finish up, my interviews, with different people. And it's almost like on TV, you play one person against the other. So, Steve's being a jerk. All right. So I move on to his brother, Bob. And I go, Bob, tell me about Steve. What do you want to know? Like, depending on his age, is he the father? Is he the son? Is he aware that his brother's involved in this insurgency? Or is he upset that he is involved in this insurgency? You'd be amazed what Bob would tell you as opposed to what Steve would tell you. So then I bring Steve back in the room, and I'm like, well, your brother says you're a stone cold killer. I don't know. I mean, that's your brother saying it. I'm not saying that. That's what he told me. And then but between all the intel and all the evidence manipulation and the psychology of it all, you break these people down, you wear these people down. Not always. Sometimes they were actually had formal resistance training. They wouldn't talk to you at all. But by and large, depending on the person and his level and where he is in the food chain of the insurgency, you could probably get information out. I'd say probably 70 to 80% of the time you get valuable intel from them.
Well, I think it's awesome to hear this story, and there's so much more inside your book. And I think we've got to bring that up. How can people get access to your book? How can people get access to you to learn more about you?
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'm on social media. I wouldn't say as many interviews as I did in the very beginning, but I do interviews with people like yourself, Paul. I'm on Newsmax pretty regular. My social media is Christopher Strom, or you Google Brooklyn to Baghdad. There's all kinds of information. In terms of the book, it's at Amazon, it's at Barnes and Noble. You can go to an independent bookstore. If they don't have it, you could ask them to order it for you. I've had lots of people that I've made friends with through social media that have reached out to me, read the book, said, wow, it's awesome. And I would tell them, hey, you want to mail it to me? Mail it to me. I'll sign it. I'll send it back to you free of charge. And I'm really gratified that. And again, these are complete strangers. I don't know these people. And for them to reach out to me and private message me on different platforms and say that, I'm very humbled by that. And I'm very appreciative of that.
Well, thank you so much for coming on my humble show. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and everything, even before this recorded conversation. And I hope that we can do it again sometime, because there's clearly a lot of stuff that we left out. And I know that people who read the book or watch this interview are going to have more questions. So I hope I can bother you again.
Absolutely, Paul. Anytime. I'm so grateful for you to have me on your show. Thank you.